Robo Hobo.
Shore point to NLO. Shore point to New Little Odessa. Come in, Odessa. You read. Shore point to NLO. Shore point to New Little Odessa. Come in, Odessa. Do you read?
Well, here we go. Video number 2. So, I've been digging pretty deep into Half-Life and going into the old documents and articles and interviews from so long ago now. And yet some of it is still pretty fresh. People still are talking about this game 18 years since its release. And here I am talking about it as well. And nerding out about it. So one of the most interesting things that has to have happened during the development of Half-Life 2 was the leak. Some German hacker hacked into the Half-Life 2 database and stripped a bunch of files out and made them publicly available on the internet. Those files contained the beginnings of Half-Life 2, and that's now known as Half-Life 2 Beta. And this is where a lot of the dark themes can be found in gameplay, not just in concept. They actually made the game a lot darker in the beta version before it was released. So thank you, German hacker guy who probably went to prison for what he did. Because without him we wouldn't have this very interesting preview into the mid to late stages of Half-Life 2's development. Now, if you want to play these Half-Life 2 beta maps, you can. I'll provide a link down in the description, but don't expect anything amazing from these. They're partially built and I think sometimes a bit broken. You probably have to no-clip through certain things. But if you just want to relax and watch somebody else play these, there's a great couple of playthroughs by Radiation Hazard, a YouTuber. I'll provide a link to his channel as well. It's quite interesting to see him go through these maps in kind of a methodical way and sort of figuring out things and making connections to the final Half-Life 2 maps. I might have to play through some of these maps myself and just get a feel for that beta stuff that they were really producing back then. But for now, let's move on to our Unity remake of the Coast, or the Wasteland as it was known in the beta. So the first thing I wanted to do was get rid of that old single-seater buggy which seemingly had no engine, and bring in the new and improved Half-Life 2 Episode 2 buggy, the big V8 Dodge Charger. But I knew I wanted to make a few changes, nothing major, just some improvements and give it a bit more character and a bit more detail. But before I could do that, I had to get some references. Oh yeah, I can already smell those petrol fumes. And with all that heavy V8 inspiration, I came up with this concept. And it's kind of just a little bit different to the original design. It's a pretty rough concept as far as concept art goes, but it just gives me enough information to work with. A few added details, a few kind of panels here and there that were missing from the original. I think in the original design that Half-Life put out, they wanted the car to look very dilapidated and like so much of their design revolved around making the humans look so desperate and so on the edge of extinction that they couldn't even get good tires. And I don't think many people realized that there was an original design for episode 2 for the car that got cut, and it was much more a piece of junk. And I'm glad that they didn't run with that design. It kind of looked terrible. And in my research and digging, I found out that when they put this model in the game, they felt that the players would be extremely disappointed to see this car. And I think going from Half-Life episode 1, with their buggy being a little bit scrappy, they decided to go with something a little more inspiring and a little more exciting. I decided I wanted the engine to be much more detailed. It's just kind of like a block and a couple of valve covers, and it needed some pulleys and a battery and just things that make the car look a little more functional. I also played around a lot with like the dash and dials. I decided that I really want to have a speedo or a rev counter on the dash. I think that'd be really cool, even though Valve decided to make those not appear on the dash in the game. But we do strangely have some sort of turbo boost gauges, or NOS gauges. I guess that makes a bit of sense. Who needs a speedo, out in the end of the world situation? But I think in my case, I want to have something like a rev counter so that the player has a bit more feedback for how the engine is responding to their driving. So I also decided that we needed some enemies in this game. It'd be pretty boring just to drive around. I definitely want to have the combined soldiers, but I decided to start with the Antlions. Mostly because I think they're more interesting in some ways. They offer more gameplay variety with their ability to fly, and it's just fun to smash into them and see them splatter all over the front of the car. So of course they would need to be higher poly for them to be kind of looking good in Unity, and I would need to upgrade a lot of the textures. Initially I tried just up-resing things and sharpening them and tweaking them in Photoshop, but it wasn't quite enough. So I had to get into sculpting. Blender isn't the best program for sculpting. ZBrush is obviously a better choice, but I think for this kind of model it's okay, especially when it's broken up into smaller pieces. I just used the multi-res modifier, and that gave me plenty of detail to work with. So what the sculpting does is give me a really high detail to bake onto a lower detail model, and that just makes the model look like it's much higher poly than it is. So here's where I'm up to with the Unity project. I've got my model of the car, got the Antlions in, and I started working on the environment a bit more, putting in a house. I made an ocean shader with some tessellation going on. But rather than talk about it, I'm just going to play it and let you watch. I got the car stuck on top of the container. This is where I need a gravity gun. So there's a couple of problems with the audio of the car. It's not as refined as it needs to be. I think in the next video I'll go over my little audio engine that I developed, and I'll tweak a lot of the sounds and add a few layers and little effects here and there for making the engine and give some cleaner feedback to the player. I also want to do some work on the Antlions. I want to make them fly and leap at the car, and maybe have them jump and land on the bonnet instead of being totally squished. But that's all I have for now. If you've got any suggestions for me, leave a comment. Thanks for watching. Bye.